Hey there. Thanks for tuning in. You ready for another episode of My Bigfoot Sighting? Alright then, let's do this.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, love's in the plow, and the five-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah.
If you'd like to be able to listen to the show without ads and have full access to bonus content, that's an option. To find out how, please go to mybigfootsighting.com.
My Bigfoot sightings all happened in the Daniel Boone National Forest. My name's Jimmy. I was born in Sydney, Ohio. My parents were originally from this county in the Stearns, Kentucky area, Macquarie County. And we moved back down here when I was 3 years old. My dad was working in the coal mines. So, growing up, I was always in the woods, always camping, hunting, fishing, like country people do. And my first time I heard anything about Bigfoot or the boogeyman or whatever was a story that my dad had told me. It was my dad, his dad, which was my grandfather, and he had two brothers, and they had a neighbor that lived beside them, and they had a couple boys. Well, they went coon hunting one night down on the river, and they got down in there. It was up 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And to kind of give you an idea, this has been an old mining camp. It's not there no more, but back then it was. This happened in the 50s. So they were down there coon hunting, and it was starting to rain a little bit, but the coon dogs encountered something and started fighting with it, hollering and screaming what they were hearing. The dogs hit the river, so it starts raining harder and lightning. So my dad and his friend took the boys, or my grandpa took my dad and the neighbor's boys into an old mining house, and they were standing there waiting, and they could hear something screaming, hollering, whatever. So they go upstairs to a second floor, and they're scared. And my grandpa and his friend sat at the top of the stairs. Well, this thing comes into the house, and they're talking back and forth. Okay, is this a bear? Is it a mountain lion? They sit there on the top of the stairs. Well, this thing comes into that old mining house. It starts ripping everything apart. You could hear it throwing stuff. I mean, it was just destroying that. And my dad and a couple of his brothers and a couple of the other friends were huddled up in the corner, and he could hear my grandpa saying, whatever it is, we can't let it get to them boys. So they're sitting at the top of the stairs with them old carbide mining lights that they used back then that don't shine very much, but shooting down those steps. And whatever it was would never venture into the light, but stayed there for 2 or 3 hours. They said that it sounded like it would leave the old house. And when I say old house, it was an old house that had been abandoned from the miners. And then it would come back in and do it again. It would like come over to the edge of where them old lights would shine down, but it would never enter it. And they sat there all night long until daylight. And, and then they got the boys and gathered up. But it had rained and stormed all night, and they couldn't see like any tracks or, anything like that. But it was well known in that area, of just high strangeness of things that was going on that couldn't be explained, because back then bears in the Daniel Boone National Forest in this area, now it's the Big South Fork, wasn't really known. You may have a stray to come through every now and then, but nobody ever seen anything. It was more like Black Panthers and stuff like that. So they never did get to see it, but they had them hemmed up in that second story of that house all night long, and they didn't come out till it was daylight. And for years that I heard this growing up, and as a young kid, I was thinking, wow, this is crazy. And then The other story is my dad's youngest brother and a couple of his older brothers and my uncle that I'm going to later talk about in another county was there. They were camping under a cliff on the Big South Fork National Park now, but back then it was just Daniel Boone. So they were down there camping, and they had some coon dogs. They had been running trot lines and staying up all night fishing and, coon hunting or this or that. Well, once again, the dogs was up there under the cliff and tore out over the hill and got into it with something. And they could hear the dogs just making all kinds of racket, screaming and hollering, whatever this thing was. And they could hear the dogs hit the river. So here they are up under this cliff, got a fire going. And the cliff wasn't real big, but, you could have a pretty good camp under there. So they're all sitting there around trying to figure out what's going on. And the next thing they know, this thing is on top of the cliff. And it's hollering, it's screaming, and it's throwing stuff off. And, they're all trying to get up the courage to lean out and look up, and finally they do, and they don't see nothing. A little time goes by, and it kind of calms down. Then it intensifies again. And this time it sounds like it's wanting to come off around the side of the cliff and come down to where they are. Well, they've got their guns turned and everything. It never comes down, but it keeps hollering and screaming. And my uncles would say it was, screaming like a woman getting murdered. And so they're all sitting there. There's like 4 or 5 of them. They're all trying to think what they can do. They've got an old wooden boat that this, one of their neighbors had. And it was tied up down at the river. So they're all sitting and thinking, trying to figure out how are they going to get down there to it, because this happened probably in the 60s. And so they're all huddled around and thinking. And so finally it starts getting worse, and it's really getting aggressive and screaming and hollering and throwing stuff and breaking stuff. And finally one of them says, I can't do this no more. And he rips out over the hill to the boat. Well, when he does that, every one of them does the same thing. They all come tearing out under that cliff. They leave everything up there, all their camping gear, the fire's still going and everything. And they're running down over the hill with no light. They finally get in a boat and paddle across, and they can still hear that thing up there raising all kinds of cane. And they couldn't really never figure out what it was. So they go back home. They make it back home late that night, and they tell their dad, my grandpa, what had went on. So the next day that they all go back down there, and all their camping gear under the cliff was all messed up, thrown about everywhere. And you could see tracks, but you couldn't really make them out because it was kind of dusty and stuff like that. And for years and years, we would talk about having experiences. And when my Uncle Junior, he's passed away now, it was my dad's baby brother. But when you watch somebody tell a true story, you watch it wash over their face and see like the blood draining out and their eyes tear up. And that one right there stuck with me because I've had multiple conversations with him about that. And, and then my dad, and hearing my dad tell me about my grandpa and all the encounters that they had of things that they didn't know what it was, but it could only be one thing, because a bear can only do so many things, and so can a human. And on that story, my uncle that lived in Wayne County, Kentucky, the next county over, he married my dad's sister, which was Junior, and the rest of them sister. Well, anyway, when he was a young man growing up in Wayne County, they lived out in an area called Parnell. Anybody that knows anything about Wayne County, they'll know exactly where I'm talking about. And at the end of Parnell, there's a place called Bugwood. Well, my uncle was raised up out there and had a hard-working mom and dad. They had it rough growing up and everything. But the kind of comical thing about it was my uncle's dad moonshined back in the day. And he would tell me stories about the local sheriff back then coming up and buying moonshine off of his dad, and how the car wouldn't come up to the driveway. It kind of had little ups and downs, but the sheriff's car would stop in one of them low spots, and they'd put the shine in it, and he'd come up and turn around and go back. Well, they lived at the end of a road, And the next, they lived the house next to the last house on the road. Well, the guy, an old man that lived at the very end, kind of lived up on a knoll, and I can't remember his name, but he was a very tall, lanky mountain man and was just tough as nails, he said. And then one night, as a kid, he said, growing up, didn't have no lights like back then, no flashlights or nothing. And he said on this one night, he was out in the yard playing around and said that he had looked up on that hill, and in the road where the moon had it lit, he seen a tall figure standing up there. Well, he thought that it was his neighbor, the old man, because he would go up there and talk to that old man and just kind of shoot the bull with him and whatever. So my uncle says that he just goes up through there, just kind of nonchalant, just walking. And he said the closer he's getting, he's thinking to himself, now, if that's him, something's not right. He's a lot taller. And so as my uncle's telling his story, you can see him getting worked up. And as he gets closer to him, he can tell that it's not this man that he's talking about. And then back then, the way he talked, the old dirt roads had, one on the left, one on the right, and then grass would grow up the middle. Well, this creature is standing in the right lane, and my uncle was in the left lane walking up there. And as he's walking, he said he's just kind of kicking dirt. And he says he wasn't really paying attention. He'd looked up and seen it and just kept walking. Well, as he gets within 15, 20 feet of it, in his mind, he said he started thinking, something ain't right. I don't think this is who I think it is. So he keeps walking and kind of just shrugging it off. And he gets close to this thing. And as he's getting closer, there's a light breeze. And where the moon is shining kind of at that creature's back, it'd be its right side because it was facing, and he was coming up to the left side of it. He could see the hair gently blowing in the wind. And he said when he got up on this thing, he said it was 8 to 9 feet tall. And he said it was black hair, blacker than black, but you could see the wind blowing the hair on its arms and stuff. And he said when he got up there by it, he said he looked up and he said in my eyes, he said he could see, he said the eyes wasn't red or glowing. He said they were white eyes. And he said, but he could see the eyes watching him as he come up through there. And I never will forget when he told this part of the story. He said, when I got up there and looked up, he said that thing had been watching me and looked down at me like, boy, you don't even want to stop. You just need to keep going where you are. So he said, as he's walking on by it, he's looking back and it's still watching him and he can see the breeze blowing the hair. And in his mind, he's trying to process what this is. He gets about 10 or 15 feet away. He rips out running up through there, terrified, and gets up to that old man. And they come out and they get some kind of light and looking, and it ain't there no more. And it really messed with him as a kid because he didn't understand what was going on. That's talking about my Uncle Jim. I'll say his name. He's not with me no more. But I heard him say my whole life, when he passed away, when he went to heaven, he wanted to ask the Lord, Lord, what was that I seen that night in Parnell? And then what did I see down on the river? And when I say down on the river, this is going to be my very first Bigfoot sighting and experience. Okay, this would have been roughly around 1975 or 76. I was 7, 8 years old, somewhere in that area. We're down on the Big South Fork River, and it was in July, and all my dad's brothers would all get together and they would camp. Always in the spring, it was 2 weeks to fish, and in the summer we'd camp. But every fall, there was always 2 weeks we would either squirrel hunt or deer hunt or whatever. Well, this month here, my Uncle Walt in Ohio, he had taken off. And so my Uncle Jim, he was there. My Uncle Lanny, my dad's half brother, he was there. And then it was my Uncle Mike and then a friend of theirs. And we were all camped down there on the river. And we wasn't probably 20 feet off the river, and the road run parallel with the river, and we was just on the other side of the road. So if you're walking straight ahead, the river would have been on the right, or the left, excuse me, and then we were camped on the right. All right. That night about I think it was about 8 or 9 o'clock. My dad let all my uncles and them use his Scout to get down in there on the river because it was really, really rough. And so we all went in there, and he'd made the arrangement. This would have been on a Friday night. My dad was working, and they made the arrangement for a couple of my uncles to run to the top of the mountain and get him. Okay. It wasn't, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 miles from off the river to the top of the mountain to get him, but it was all straight up, rutted out. So it'd take 45 minutes or an hour each way. So when they take off, it leaves me and my Uncle Lanny, which at the time he'd have been around, I'm going to say 14 to 16 years old, and my Uncle Jim would have been in his early to mid 20s. Well, after they had left, we was all messing around the fire, and we just got through eating and everything. And my Uncle Jim was sitting, they'd cut logs we was sitting on, had the tent set up. And it hadn't been probably 30 minutes or so after they left, me and my Uncle Lanny was just goofing around. Like I said, I was just like 7, 8 years old. And Lanny was just an early teenager. And he said, "Boys, shut up." And we didn't. He said, "Boys, I mean, shut up. I hear something." So then when I see him, he's serious. And so we get real quiet. And about that time, I have never heard the awfulest screaming in my life come off the top of that mountain. And I know people have different experiences where they whoop and the tree knocks and all that. And my thinking of it, I think a lot of times when they communicate like that, they're getting ready to hunt, or they're hunting, or just communicating. Well, this thing didn't do none of that. It was just screaming and hollering, breaking stuff. And where we're down on the river, if a man was to walk to the top up there, it'd probably take him, to the end of that ridge, probably 30 minutes at least, and hit straight up. So we're hearing this thing scream and holler, and all of a sudden, it starts coming off that mountain. And when I mean coming off that mountain, I mean it ain't walking. I mean, it sounds like a bulldozer. Stuff are being broke. And I see my uncle, and I'm scared to death. I don't know what's going on. And I see my Uncle Lanny, and it comes down about halfway, and it gets quiet. And we're standing there, and you hear the fire crackling and stuff, and got one lantern hanging up, and you hear the frogs on the river and everything. And by that point, I'm scared to death. And I'm hugging my Uncle Lanny, and my Uncle Jim has a Mauser, an old rifle. I think it's an old military rifle. I'm not really sure. But anyway, shortly after that, it hollers and screams again, and here it comes. This time it don't stop. It comes plumb down into camp, and as it's coming, it's just breaking, snapping, and just, it sounds like a dozer or an elephant running through the woods. And he's swinging that rifle around. And by this time, me and my Uncle Lanny, we're trying to climb his back. And he says, "Get off, boys. Go in the tent." So we're going in the tent, and the only light there is, the old Coleman lantern. It was about 15 yards on the other side of the fire, and the fire's going. So if anybody's ever camped, you know how far those lights will shine out. And then it's just pitch black. There's like a wall. Well, we're in the tent, and we're hearing this. Okay, and it's hollering and screaming, and where the road was parallel with the river, it would do a half moon. It'd keep circling us. And it done this for 15 or 20 minutes, and it seemed like forever, and then it got quiet. And we're sitting there listening, and then all of a sudden, me and my Uncle Lanny are looking out the tent watching my Uncle Jim. And I notice he swings around, pointing where the road would run parallel with the river, like toward where the lantern is lit. He's pointing at Mauser, and it starts up again. And we're looking out of the tent, and you could see the trees shaking. And I'm talking trees that's 6 to 8, 10 inches in diameter. And you could see like the foliage up in there. And I'm not talking about these trees just barely shaking. They're swaying back and forth. And this thing would let out a scream, and then it would move. And then what I didn't realize years, later after that, and we have talked about it, is there was 2 of these things. Because once that was going on and they had my uncle's focus at this one area, me and my Uncle Lanny are hearing something behind the tent. And it gets so bad there, but it ain't screaming. You can hear it walking. You could hear it wasn't no, like how a squirrel sounds or how a deer walks. This was bipedal, 2 feet walking, crunch, crunch. Well, it gets so close to the tent, we tear out of the tent like gangbusters. We about knocked my Uncle Jim down, and we're screaming. It's behind the tent, and he's hollering and screaming at us, boys, get off of me, I'm going to have to shoot. And we're screaming at him, it's there. And about that time, it hollers behind the tent. And the tree stops shaking the way he's looking. So now he's in, he's looking at 12 o'clock, and then he's looking at a 5 o'clock position behind where our tent is at. And this keeps going on. One would draw his attention one way, and then the other one would do something. Went back and forth. And by this time, I'm crying. I'm only 7, 8 years old. I look at my Uncle Lanny. He's crying. We're all over my uncle, and he keeps telling us, boys, get off. I'm going to have to shoot. And then I never will forget. I never will. And my uncle told me and my Uncle Lanny, he said, boys, you don't never repeat this. He said, because if you do, they'll think you're crazy and they won't believe you. And even some of this stuff that I'm going to say, my dad doesn't even know about because of the ridicule and, it was your mind playing tricks. Well, anyway, after these things go on trying to get his attention, the one behind the tent makes a sound I can't explain. It was like a growl, but it was just a bass that just come out and was like a low rumble, how you can hear thunder off the instrument. It's just how it's just rumbling. Well, and then you hear a snap, and we're all looking where we're hearing this growl or whatever it is. We hear the snap, we swing around, and I'll never forget this as long as I live. And when this happened, my uncle dropped that rifle. This thing was behind, when they hung the lantern up, that's what I need to tell. When they hung the lantern up, it was about 15 feet away from the fire, but they put a cooler down and drove a nail, and it was up about 8 feet. Well, this thing was about 5 feet behind it. And what was funny, the trees that the lantern was on was about 10-inch diameter, and so was the other trees behind it. Well, this thing, I guess, thought it was hid, but it was still far enough around where the lantern was like hitting the tree. It was still kind of black around it, but you could still see. I never will forget. This thing is 4 feet wide, and I guess because it thought its head was behind the tree, you couldn't see it. But when this thing stuck its head out, I never will forget. My uncle dropped his gun, and we're froze. We're froze and don't know what to do. And it's standing there looking at us. And at the time, I was so young, I wasn't trying to see details. My eyes was locked on its eyes, and we were froze. And so it seemed like it was 20 minutes, but it probably wasn't 20 seconds. My uncle comes to, and when he reaches down and grabs that gun and brings it up, that thing, and this is weird. This thing turns around and moves. It seems like it went 30 feet, but where, if you've ever camped, how a light will only shine out so far, it disappeared. Well, after that happened, you could hear something behind the tent, and then it started working its way back around, and it didn't go up the mountain, but it was working its way around like to get with this thing. Well, all this is going on, and this encounter here lasted, I'm going to say 30 to 40 minutes, because at this time, I told you that, my other uncles went to get my dad. Well, we wasn't even paying attention about any vehicles or anything coming. And about that time, I never will forget, the lights on that old Scout hit them trees. Well, when them lights on that Scout hit the trees, this thing tore off toward that river like a bulldozer. And when that thing hit the water, it sounded like a car had dropped out of the sky. I'd never heard a splash like that in my life. So the other thing had run off down the road where it run parallel with the thing. So when my dad get in the camp, here we are hysterical. We're going crazy, and, a scout runs up, I'm screaming and hollering, they get out and, like, what in the world's going on? And we're trying to explain them, oh, maybe it's a mountain lion or this or that. And they all get what lights they had, and everybody had a gun. And I never forget, me and my Uncle Lanny, and I think it was, I really can't remember who stood by the fire, but the rest of the guys went out. You could see their lights shining around and how they went out, in there, and they was gone for 15, 20 minutes, come back and said, boys, we don't see anything. You reckon to be a mountain lion, and here we are, we're saying they ain't no way. My uncle's saying, and I'm a kid and I don't know what I've just witnessed, but my uncle's saying, no, it ain't. But at the time, he was telling me it was something. It wasn't a bear because, at that time, if you seen a bear in that part, it was very rare. But nowadays, they're overrun in here where they've repopulated them. So he's telling my dad and them, they said, well, next morning when it comes daylight, in the morning after, they go down to the edge of the river, and you could see where that thing had went off. That thing had hit the river and swam across to the other side. And we had camped down there, like I said, a month. We'd been down there probably 2 weeks before this encounter happened. And I was all time running around getting into things, and I got into a patch of poison ivy, and I got it so bad that it got in my eyes and my mouth. They had to take me out. It was during summer break, and took me to the doctor, and, he fixes me up. And the guys were going back, and I was throwing such a fit to go back with them. My mom let me go, and I was all down there with my uncles and everything, but never did have no more experiences after that outing. And then the next time that I had a experience, I was by myself. It was kind of in the same region, and it was during bow season. And where we had parked, we would walk up about 5 benches on the top or the side of this mountain. And my neighbor across the road from my dad owned this land. They owned like 300 acres there. So during bow season, we'd always work, or they seemed like they was always up on that 4th or 5th bench, working their way down eating acorns. So we go up there and we're hunting and doing good. And I'd killed my first buck there. So we was real familiar with the area and everything. So one morning I went by myself, and I took and put my backpack in. I was bow hunting, had tree stand and everything like that. Well, I get up here to that 5th bench, and I set my tree stand up. I climb up in. It's an hour before daylight. I'm sitting there. That morning, I seen a coyote. And if anybody's ever seen coyotes in the woods, they never stop. They're always moving or running. And I thought that was kind of cool. So it got up around 11 o'clock. I climbed down. I was kind of just meandering around, and I sat there on the rock and eat some lunch and everything. But I always heard my dad and then uncles that had hunted that before, that there was a trail that went up on the side of this mountain, and they called it a gap. It wasn't really a gap, but this old trail here, I don't know if it was an Indian trail or just a game trail, but it went up the side of this hill. I mean, it looked like a motorcycle trail. It was just flattened out to where it was just more slick. So I went up there about, I'm going to say about 12:30, 1 o'clock. I'm up there hunting, and I put my tree stand up on a different spot, and I'm looking around and watching, and then I get bored. So I get down, and I'm on top of the ridge, and it runs from left to the right. Well, to the right, it went out and kind of circled around. And if I'm looking down toward that holler at probably my 9 o'clock position, there was a little finger ridge run down. And I had my binoculars, and I was looking for some, horn trees or rubs or whatever you call them. So I get down, and I go down through there, and I have put my stuff down. I'm a pack. Put my grunt around my neck, and I'm 21, 22 years old at the time. So I hit my grunt, and I hit my horns and everything like that. And I sit there and listen for probably 15, 20 minutes. I could hear something over on that ridge to my right, and it curved, but it went way farther out than this finger ridge. So I thought, well, that may be a deer, squirrel, whatever. So I'm there and I hit my grunt call. I hit my horns and I hear it again over there. Well, when I pulled my antlers, my sheds back, and when I went to hit him again, when I hit, I'm not lying to you, something tore off of that hill coming toward me. And my wife, I just told my wife this afternoon. She didn't know nothing about it. And nobody knows about this because nobody would believe me. But I'm telling you, when I went to hit them horns for the second time, this thing come off that hill and it sound like a truck tearing through the woods. My mind, I'm thinking, I got excited at first. I'm thinking, oh my God, this is a big buck. I'm getting ready to kill. So I'm not even up in the tree stand yet. So I'm standing there with my bow and that thing is running and it comes down across the bottom and up probably about a third of the way of the hill and it stops. All right. I've got my eyes fixated on where this area stopped. And if anybody knows when you hunt like bow season in October, how the foliage gets orange and red and yellow and all that, and it's so thick you can't see nothing. So and didn't know it, but I had my antlers hanging on my right bend of my arm, and I've got my release up, and I'm holding it. And my knees are shaking. I'm thinking I'm getting ready to kill the biggest buck that's ever been seen. Well, my eyes are fixated on that. There's no sound. Whew. And what I'm about to tell you next has been with me for years. My eyes are fixated where this thing had stopped or whatever I thought it was. And I'm looking at 12 o'clock straight toward it down over the hill. All right. At 10 o'clock position, there's a big old beech tree. This thing comes out from behind that tree. I never, ever will forget that moment. Because let me tell you, I'm 30 yards of this thing. In my mind, I'm thinking, why are you there? I'm trying to process it. All this stuff's going through my head. I'm reliving the sound of this thing coming off the hill and coming a third of the way up. But how are you here? Why are you not there? And in my mind, I was thinking, how did you move 70 yards from where I heard it stop to where it was at? In my mind, I was replaying it. I mean, and this stuff happened so fast. And me and this thing has locked eyes. This thing was black, 8 to 9 feet. And the hair was 3 or 4 inches long, but out on the tips, it was more of a brown color. If that makes any sense to anybody, it was black, but the hairs, where the sun was going down, you could see like a red or a light brownish tint to it. So here we are, 30 yards, we're locked eyes. And I'm standing there and my knees are shaking. And when I've listened to the other people on your show talking about the primal fear, people have no understanding of what this means. You freeze, it's worse than a fight or flight. To me, it was. And I'm locked eyes with this thing for, I'd say 3 to 5 minutes. It ain't moving. I'm not moving. I'm 30 yards from it. And I'm trying, in my mind, I keep replaying the sounds. Okay, it should be here. What is this? Okay, and then I start thinking, at that moment there, it come rushing back to me what I'd seen when I was 7 or 8 years old on that river. And I'm telling you, at that moment there, I lost all reality of time or anything going on around me. And I haven't told this story because people won't believe you, or if they do, they think you're crazy. But I'm telling you, I know what I seen. I was 30 yards from it. And this thing was, like I said, 8 or 9 feet tall. The face it looked human, but it wasn't. His nose was flat. The skin wasn't black, but it was real dark. And its mouth was open, and I could see its teeth. I'm talking these teeth are the whitest teeth I've ever seen in my life. And we're locked eyes, and I'm looking at it. And now thinking back on it, I wish I could have, detailed, but I hear a lot of them talk about it had a narrowed waist. This one didn't. This thing was massive. I remember they talk about having a neck. No, there wasn't a neck, but the muscles on top of its shoulders were massive, and its arms were huge, and its hands, where it had it on that beech tree. This beech tree is 36 to 40 inches in diameter. It's huge. And this thing has got one hand on it and leaned out and standing there, and we're having a stare off. I say 3 to 5 minutes. I have no idea. It could be longer, could be shorter. Time stops when something like this happens, because my brain was replaying it coming off the hill. My brain was replaying what I seen on the river when I was a kid, trying to process in my mind. Okay, as this thing's going on, it starts kind of dropping. And I'm thinking, what in the world? And am I seeing a bear? Is it getting ready to go down on 4 legs? No, it wasn't. This thing had a hold of that tree and started leaning to its left down toward the ground. It didn't have nothing in its left hand, didn't have nothing in its right hand. And this thing he's got his eyes locked on me, and I can't get my eyes off him. I can't look at nothing else but his eyes. And those eyes were massive. And people say that they're black, this or that. No, these eyes, you could see the white in them. The skin was so dark. The eye white was just as bright as the teeth. This thing keeps leaning down, and thinking back on it now, I don't know if it was trying to pick up a stick or an acorn, but I was trying to look down to see what it was doing or trying to grab, but I couldn't get my eyes off of it because it kept staring at me. It never turned its head or nothing. It was fixated on me. So as this is going on, it's like slow motion. I don't know if he knew I was there. I was in the wide open, and so was he, other than his right arm on the tree. But slowly and methodically, this thing goes down and keeps going down, and finally gets its hands to the ground, and I could hear it hit the leaves. But then the leaves were dry and crunchy, and I'm locked on it. Well, I'd never seen what it picked up or something. When it started to come back up, the facial expression changed. And this is what bothered me the most. It went from a puzzled look looking at me to almost like, and I told my wife this, and it was just, how your mind will play tricks on your this or that. I started thinking, God, this thing's demonic. It's the devil or it's something, but its facial expressions changed, and it made me feel different. Buddy, that at that time, when it finally stood back up, I never seen what was in its left hand. I tore out of there. I left everything, and I still had an arrow in the bow. I start tearing off up that hill. I'm probably, 60 yards down on that finger ridge from the very top, and it's dry. And here I take off, and my legs are like jello, but I'm trying to run as fast as I can, but my legs ain't working. And so I didn't fall, but my feet was sliding out from under me, man. I guess that'd been a funny video, because there'd have been leaves flying everywhere. But in my mind, I'm thinking this ain't real. I'm not really here. Something's not right. So I get up to the top, and I turn and look over my right shoulder. This thing ain't at that tree no more. It's coming to me. And at that time, I almost lost my bodily function. I'm not going to lie. I finally when I crested that ridge and started down, when I started down that path I was telling you about, wasn't hardly any leaves on it. It was dirt. So I can hear my feet fall, thumping, going down through there. I can hear this thing still coming through the leaves. And that trail is probably about, I'm going to say 80 to 90 yards, because it don't go straight down. It kind of parallels the side of the mountain, if you know what I'm talking about. So I'm barreling down through there, and I've got that arrow still in my bow. Well, it flies out, and I've got my quiver on, but the arrow flies out. I get to the bottom. When I get to the bottom, I need to turn to the right a little bit to head off toward my truck. When I get to the bottom and make that turn, I look, he's done crested the hill and coming down the path. At that time, I'm thinking I'm going to die. And I run down 5 benches as hard as I can go. About the second to the last bench, I stepped, and I guess where an old tree had blown over, but it looked level. I piled up, but I'm going so fast. When I hit the ground, I just flip over the edge, and I'm sliding down that other one. I get up and go, and I could hear him, but I couldn't see him because I'm so many benches low. If he wanted to have caught me, he would have. Well, I get down to the bottom, and I can see the gravel road, and I get down there. He never come down, I don't believe, below the 3rd bench. And so I get to the truck, and I throw my bow on the ground on the gravel road beside the truck, and I'm digging for my keys and everything. Can't figure it out. But I've got a small backpack on my back, and I forgot I put the keys in there. I'm scrambling like an idiot. I throw the bow in there. It breaks the side off of me. When I get in the truck, I'm hysterical. I peel out of there. I mean, I'm all over that gravel road, and I'm trying to look up to my left on the side of that hill, and I can't see nothing. But in my mind, I'm thinking that thing's going to come down in the road. But he never did. And from where I was at, it ain't a half a mile till you hit the blacktop. And where I'm talking about hunting is you get down to this. I ain't really going to name the area, but it gets down in forks, and you can go down the lower end of the creek, or you can go to the upper end of the creek, or if you go to the right, you can go up across this one mountain. If you go to the left, it's up another mountain. And on the back side of that is where I'd had my first experience. And when I got home, I didn't say nothing to nobody. I never told my dad. Me and my dad hunted religiously for years, and then he got out of it because of work. And he worked 5-6 days a week. And so he calls and says, "Hey, let's go hunting this weekend." This is about Tuesday or Wednesday, and I'm up there over the weekend. And I told him, I said, "No, my buddies are going to Land Between the Lakes. I'm going with them." And if I have this conversation now, he don't know about this, but he would know exactly what I'm talking about. He said, "Son, why are you leaving one of the hottest spots to go out there?" And I told him I just want to go out there with my buddies, but that wasn't the truth. But where my dad was hunting, he was a couple 200 or 300 yards on around. The mountain had a kind of big bend in like a bow. And, I go on to Land Between the Lakes. My dad goes up there. He don't have any encounter anything like that. He sees several deer that morning. He shoots every arrow out of his bow, and it don't hit nothing. So here I am out in Land Between the Lakes. I didn't know that till I got back. But while I was out there, I thought, everything was good. Well, there was a bunch of us at Land Between the Lakes, and we was off I believe it's called Wrangler's Trail. We was camped around there, and where I was hunting at was close to the ATV trail. If anybody's been to LBL, you'll know what I'm talking about. And Wrangler's Loop or Trail, it's been a few years since I've been out there now. But I'm hunting one evening, and there's a buddy of mine. I won't mention his name. I don't know if he'd want me to, but anyway, I shoot a doe. And, everybody says, "Hey, got an agreement." We all had radios. "Hey, if you see a doe and you can shoot one and, tag it, and we'll cut it up and have camp meat." And we was like, "Oh, yeah, we'll do that." So we're out there, and I kill a doe, but I didn't get a good shot on it. It's about 35, 40 yards quartering away, and I pretty much gut shot this thing. But when I did, it come through the back leg and injured it pretty bad. Well, it runs off and runs down across the road over towards where the ATV trails are at. Okay, so this was in the evening, by the way. So me and my buddy and my uncle, he was out there with us too. My Uncle Mike, I'll say his name. And we got on the blood trail, and I told him, I said, "Look, it was a bad shot. And, I gut shot this deer. Let's not even push it. We'll wait." And it was getting later, and then it got dark. Well, me and my buddy went down through. My uncle drove us around through there, and I said, "Yeah, okay, right here's where it come off the bank." So we bail out of the truck on the right side, and my uncle goes on up to the top of the hill about a quarter of a mile and sits. Well, I'll go ahead and tell this part, but while he didn't know, he got up there and fell asleep. He didn't know what was about to happen to us. So we get down there, and we find the deer. It's over the bank from the road and probably about 30 yards from where it drops off to the bank. It's piled up, a bunch of saplings and stuff around. So we're there and like, heck yeah. So I get my knife out, I'm gutting it and everything. And I give him a tag to my buddy and he tags it and everything. We hear these coyotes start up. And me and him both looked at each other and, you know, that's not good because when one started yelping and then this thing turned into a pack. And I'm not lying. And the sounds were coming where it come off the bank and come down and cross the road. And I'm not lying to you. We heard them things. I don't know. We never did see all of them, but we heard them things come off that bank. And I'm not lying. You could ask my buddy. You could hear their claws on the blacktop. And when he looked at me and we both said, get up a tree. So we shot up a tree. Hear them things come off that hill and they go straight to that deer. We're hollering and screaming and stuff and carrying on. And about that time, the god-awfulest scream come out and them coyotes, they froze in their tracks. And we're both up these little old skinny trees. And I'm thinking the whole time, mine's going to break out and I'm going to fall right in the middle of these things. And my buddy, he ain't 20 yards from me and we ain't 8 feet off the ground. So this is going on and them coyotes are quiet and it's dark and we've got our headlamps off because we didn't want the coyotes to see where we was at. I don't know what sense that made. But anyway, them things start attacking the deer. Well, this thing, the second scream it made was on top of the bank on the other side of the road. And when it come off of that hill, the thumps and stuff it was making, it sounded like a boulder rolling but thumping every time it bounced. And when we heard that, them coyotes, if I'm trying to explain how we were up these 2 sapling trees 20 yards apart. The deer are to our back and to our right, and that's where the highway's at. All right. And about, I don't know, less than 100 yards, we knows where the road comes in to where the ATV trail was back then. So them coyotes take off the other way. They don't come under the trees we're on. Well, we hear this thing after it screamed. We was thinking a mountain lion or something. Didn't know. And in the back of my mind, I was thinking, they ain't no way. There's no way this can be happening. And I told him, I don't want to say his name, but anyway, I said, I'm getting down. I'm out of here. The coyotes had done left. And I bailed out of that tree and I took off running because I know where that road was, that ATV trail. Well, at this time, them screams hurt. It woke my uncle up. And he's thinking, what in the world is going on? He's a quarter mile up the road. I'm barreling through the woods and don't have a weapon or nothing on me. Had a little old hand lamp. It got knocked off. I'm running as hard as I can go, bouncing off trees and everything. And my buddies, he's right beside me and we're burning wind. When we hit that road, I knew to turn to the right to get back up the highway. And finally, you could see headlights coming over the hill. And it was my uncle Mike coming back to get us. And when he got down there in that old Jeep truck that we drove out there, we're in the roads. We got blood all over us where I've gutted this deer. And he's probably thought, we've lost our minds. And we're screaming, get out of here, get out of here, coyotes, this, that. But we didn't have time what was going on. But he heard the scream. We never did see what this thing was, but we heard it come off the hill. And you could hear the footfall come across the road. And from where it dropped off, and we had a far enough gap, I knew I wasn't going to stay there till it got to that deer. I wasn't. And neither was my buddy. So like I said, we run out, hit the road, and here he comes. Blood all over us, all over my hands where I'd gutted the deer. Don't mean to be graphic or anything, but we're freaking out. We don't even get in the trunk. We jump in the back of the truck and we're beating on the back glass. Go, 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 go. He thinks something bad's happened. He tears out there and me and him are going up there and he finally drives a mile and gets up there and stops. And, you know, I'm uneasy. I'm like, just go on to camp, go to camp. We're fine. And me and my buddies looked at each other and, you know, what was that? We know the coyotes were there. We heard them coming, but what was the scream? What was coming off the hill? What would be so mean to run off at least a dozen or more coyotes on a kill? That's what we were having problems trying to process. So we get back to camp, we're telling the story and everything, and everybody's looking at us laughing like we're idiots, this, that, or whatever. And I've listened to your show where I've never been to the Hotel California out there, but I've heard about the Bigfoot things. I never seen what this was, but whatever it was, when it screamed and the footfall coming off that bank and hit thumping across the highways, them coyotes were gone. They didn't yelp. They didn't nothing. They tore out of there like they were on fire. And that's what scared me. I thought, if something that mean is scaring that many off on a fresh kill, I don't need to stay here. So we get back, we're telling it, like I said, they go, yeah, you've lost your mind. Well, anyway, the trip goes uneventful and we come back home. And then the next part I'm going to tell is a few years later, this happened. The LBL trip happened roughly around, I'm going to say 90. No, I'll be wrong. This happened around, 98, 99. All right. And fast forward to about 4 years ago, my girlfriend at the time, she's my wife now, we go up, same area, but where I had the 30-yard encounter, but we go on past where I'd had that encounter probably 3-4 miles up there. And there's 2 big campgrounds up here. And I'll give the name to one of the campgrounds. It's Great Meadows. And then there's another one called Deer Loop. But on the way up through there, there's little individual camping spots on the left side along the creek. Well, the first one, campsite we come to, I've camped there many and many a times. And then right before you get to that campsite, there's a big field on the right where a big old barn is. And on the other side, it's just a huge thicket. I guess at one time it had probably been farmland too. But anyway, I knew that was a good camping spot. So me and my wife, we go up there, and where that field is on the right, soon as you get to where that field ends, there's a road that turns to the right. It don't go up there 200 feet and there's no cemetery. Well, if you go on past where the cemetery is, it ain't 200 feet. And right there on the left is the camping spot, and it's right on the creek. I mean, it ain't 20 feet off of it. And this is in April. Been April of, it's 23, been April of, 2019, somewhere in there. Yeah, probably somewhere there. Anyway, we get there, we get our camping stuff out. And, if anybody is familiar how most camping sites, they'll have like these cross ties that they'll put down and put these small pea gravel where you can set your tent. They'll have a little fire pit. They'll have these big old metal poles that come up like a candy cane and got a hook on it for your lantern. And then there's some wooden steps that goes down about, 6 or 8 steps down to the creek. Okay. So when we get there, I get a stick out, and you can tell, nobody had been there for a little while because it is 1st of April. It was cool in the mornings, but warm in the afternoon, starting to get a few thunderstorms. So I get a stick out and I'm leveling it off real good. And I set up my tent. And before we went up there, my dad had these rope lights that were solar. And the old folk tale is that snakes won't cross a light or this or that. So my wife, she's scared to death of snakes. I love catching them. But anyway, I get the tent set up. Didn't even get the lights down yet. But here I am. I'm doing all this work, getting everything ready, get the tent up. And I'm not lying to you. At the corner of these cross ties toward the creek, there's 2 pair of wet shoes there. They was not there when I pulled in. We talked about this today before I come on the show. We talked about it several times today. I done all that work, and those shoes were not there. I put this tent up. Them shoes were right there. And I'd had that stick out leveling where I was pushing them little gravel over the edge. Them shoes wasn't there. My wife was behind me getting stuff out of the truck. She walks up. Said, "Where'd you get them shoes?" I said, "What shoes?" And I turned around, and I'm not lying. There's 2 shoes sitting on that, and they're wet like somebody come up and kicked them off. So I'm thinking in the back of my mind, okay, wait a minute. Now I'm losing my mind. And I looked at her. I said, "Where'd you get them at? Did you find them down here?" She said, "Hun, I've been in the truck getting stuff out. You know that." So I start thinking, okay, hang on a minute. I replay. Okay, when I pulled in, I know exactly I done this and I done that and whatever. These shoes are probably about a size, I'm going to say, I don't know, maybe a 6 or size 7. But I'm telling you, they're soaking wet. Me and her are standing around there dumbfounded, and we both keep thinking, oh, the other one's played a trick on me. No, neither one of us done this. These shoes come out of nowhere, and I can't explain it. I'm telling the God's honest truth, them shoes were not there, because when we pulled in, you could have seen them. It's flat. The gravels are level with the cross ties. And I'm thinking, and this has got my mind blown away, and I start thinking, I don't want to get too worried because she's afraid of the dark, and I don't want to get her excited. So I go about, I get this little solar thing out, and it's getting close to dark, and it's got the tent and everything lined up. We're sitting around, and I'm still thinking, how's them shoes there? And I started to go over and get them and move them, and I thought to myself, I ain't touching those shoes. I don't know where they come from, but I know they wasn't there. And I'm thinking this the whole time back in my mind. So we get the fire going. I get a fire going good, and it's got, if people know, there's a metal, it sticks up probably about 10, 12 inches, and it's round, looks like a half of a wheel off of a big semi, but it's got a grate that'll fold back out of the way until you get the fire going. Then you can fold it back over to put your food or whatever on. Well, I get the fire going, and by this time, it's getting up to, I'm going to say, about 10 o'clock. We had fixed us some hot dogs, and we're just chowing down, having a good time. Everything's going good. Nobody's coming by on the road going up to them other campsites. We're up there by ourselves. And I didn't know this till later, and I'll get to this. We're sitting around there, and my back's to the tent. The creek is to the left, and I'm looking at the fire pit. My wife's on the other side, and she's got a tobacco stick. Anybody knows what a tobacco stick? I used to build a lot of furniture, neat things out of that. And I always just had one in the back of the truck, I don't know, for just different things. So she's sitting there, and she's just having a good time, and we're talking, and she's poking in the fire and everything. And then I hear something. And I've heard this sound on different recordings, and it starts out with the deep, and then goes up real high like a siren pitch, holds it for like 8, 10, 12 seconds, and then drops off immediately. It don't wind down, it just stops. I hear it. You can hear the creek, but this thing is over the crackle of the fire and the creek, and I hear it. And she hears it too, but she don't have a reaction. All right, probably no more than 10 seconds, 15 at the most. This thing fires up again. This time, I don't know if it was turning our way where you could hear it better, but it was just that, just inhaled it up there and then dropped off again. She's poking that fire, having a good time, and she freezes. And I could see it wipe over her face. In my mind, I know what it is, but I ain't going to say anything. She looks at me real funny, and you tell her, just color drops out of her face. She said, "Hon, what was that?" I said, "Well, hon, I really don't know what that was." Back in my mind, I knew. Ain't no bear sounds like that. No coyote can hold a pitch like that. They ain't anything in these woods. And while I'm thinking that, and we're small talking, and it gets quiet, and it's almost like everything got quiet. Well, this thing screams out the third time. And I'm telling you, but the second time, when she said, "Hon, what was that?" She said, "Why would there be sirens up here?" I said, "There's no sirens up here." It had that high of a pitch, if you know what a siren, but it holds it. And I've heard these vocalizations, and I can't remember where they were from, but I'll get into that later. But anyway, she said, "Why is there a siren?" I said, "Hon, there ain't no sirens up here." No more than she says that, a couple seconds, this thing does it again. Well, this time it's closer. And I mean, you can hear the deep just out of its gut, just that, and then it gets really, really high and holds it there 8, 10 seconds, nothing. Well, by this time, you know how you can hear, like crickets and tree frogs and this and that? They ain't nothing. No sound whatsoever. The only thing you can hear is a barely trickle from the creek, because where we was at, it wasn't like shoals where it runs shallow over the waters and makes the rippling sound. You could barely hear the crack of the fire because the fire's winding down. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I know where we're camped. I know what's just right up the road, and it was coming from the left. And I was thinking, well, right past where we're camped, there's a picnic shelter and everything on the left. They got a little pavilion that's like a little pole barn with picnic tables under it and multiple little picnic tables down through there. But just on the edge of the grass there, there's a road that goes down. They've got bars there now because this is still all in the Daniel Boone National Forest. Every bit of this has happened here other than the LBL trip.
We're going to stop tonight's show here, but don't worry, Jimmy will be back next week for part 2. Thanks as always for listening, and have a great night.
Well, that's it for tonight's show. If you've had a Bigfoot sighting and would like to be a guest, please go to mybigfootsighting.com and let us know. Thanks for listening. Have a great night.
Seen a bunch of rundown no-horse towns where the church is the backbone, loves and the plow, and the 5-string melodies grooving, with the farmland rows where the roots run deep, beyond the noise of the busy streets, where the songs of the South are soothing. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah, the sound of a memory brings me back to the bluegrass playing on my dad's 8-track. His pickup man had been through it, getting through the day on Scruggs and Skags, bucking hay bales to those Tennessee jams. There's no other way that I'd do it. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Pace of the city life drives me wild. The only tune is the cars rushing by, with the bass on the stereos booming. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Yeah. Something going backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm ringing out, I don't run from banjo music. Something going backwards and double time, getting to the soul and the drumming, low Kentucky style. Those are the anthems strumming out, country boy living. When I hear the front porch picking down, home rhythm, ride chicken porch swing, mama's best sweet tea kind of sound.